Easter came. It was still living in Block 25, Room 7. In comparison to Christmas, as usual in Auschwitz, not many colleagues were still alive at the point. Typhoid was a great menace to us. Everyone was falling sick around me. Only a handful of us, old colleagues, were still standing on our ground. Contracting typhoid was usually tantamount to death, but our cultivated lice were doing a fine job too. Typhoid was rife in the SS men's barracks. The physicians could barely manage the Siberian typhoid as well as the bodies of the SS men. They suffered many losses. Usually, an SS man who had contracted typhoid was sent to the hospital in Katowice, but usually they died in the end anyway. A transport of prisoners was departing from Auschwitz to Mauthausen in June. This transport carried Colonel 64 Kazimierz Heilmann, although he could have weaseled his way out, who, as he said, wanted to attempt to escape on the way to Mauthausen, which did not happen. The same transport took Officer Cadet 15 Witold Szymkowiak, Sergeant 119 Józef Miksa, and Second Lieutenant 67 Czesław Darkowski. Before his departure, Colonel 64 Kazimierz Heilmann advised me to take Colonel 121 Juliusz Gilewicz to fill his shoes. I did that. Colonel 121 Juliusz Gilewicz agreed, joined us, and worked in harmony ever since. Colonel 122 Teofil Bogumił Dziama has also decided to join our ranks. At the time, Colonel 23 Aleksander Stawarz and the former MP 70 Stanisław Dubois were shot. After having the first 2 electric crematoriums built in Birkenau, the construction of the next 2 similar to the first ones began. The first ones were working without respite, and the transports kept coming. Some prisoners were brought to us, to the camp, and then registered here by being given their numbers, which were already over 40,000. But the vast majority of transports went straight to Rajsko-Birkenau, where people were being turned into fumes and ash without being registered. On average, 1,000 people were burned every day at the time. Who were the people heading straight into the jaws of death, and why were they headed there? They were Jews from France, Czechoslovakia, the Netherlands, and other countries in Europe. They were traveling alone, without escort, and it was only several kilometers from Auschwitz where they were given guards and shunted off on the spur track to Rajsko-Birkenau. And why were they heading there? I had the opportunity to speak to Jews from France a couple of times, and one time with a rarely seen transport of Polish Jews from Białystok and Grodno. From what they anonymously said, as far as I could make out, that they were leaving as a result of public notifications being displayed in many cities and states under German occupation, promising that only the Jews who went to go to the Reich to work could expect to survive. So they were going to the Third Reich, even more so because they were being encouraged by letters from the Jews in Auschwitz, and surely from other camps as well, saying that the conditions of work were good and that they were doing well. They had the right to take some hand luggage, only as much as they were able to carry, so they would take 1 or 2 suitcases, trying to put all their wealth in them, selling their immovable and movables, and buying small but valuable goods like diamonds, gold dollars, etc. Trains carrying about 1,000 people every day had their terminus at the sidetrack in Rajsko. Ramps were put at their sides, and the wagons unloaded onto them. I wonder, what were the SS men thinking at such moments? There were many women and children in these carriages, sometimes babies in their cradles. Here, they were to end their lives altogether, like a herd of animals, led for slaughter. For now, though, Not anticipating anything, the passengers were stepping onto the ramps as ordered. To avoid problematic scenes, they were treated with relative politeness. They were told to put all their food onto one pile and all their goods onto another one. They were told that these items would be returned to them later on. Passengers had a reason for their first anxieties. Will not they lose their belongings? Will they be able to find their luggage? Will their suitcases not be switched? Then they were divided into groups. Men and boys over 13 years old were in one group, and women with children, boys up to 13, were in the other. Under the false impression of having to take a shower, they were told to undress themselves in two separate groups, keeping up appearances of some privacy. The clothes, also put onto two huge piles, were allegedly going to be disinfected. The anxiety would mount. Would they swap our clothes and underwear? Then hundreds of them, women with children separated from their menfolk, were heading into barracks, which they thought were the baths, but in reality were gas chambers. They had false windows in the facade. There was a wall inside. After the airtight door was closed, the mass murder would begin inside. From a little balcony, an SS man wearing a gas mask would throw gas down onto the crowd gathered below him. Two types of gas were used, in breakable cylinders and in discs packed in airtight cans. The discs, upon being taken out of the cans by the SS man wearing rubber gloves, turned to gas that filled the chamber and killed the gathered people rapidly. It took several minutes. They waited 10 minutes. Then the gas chambers were aired. The doors opposite the side of the ramp were opened, and commandos composed of Jews were transporting still warm bodies on the wheelbarrows and carts to the nearby crematorium, where the corpses were quickly incinerated. In the meantime, the next 100 would enter the chambers. In the future, technical improvements were introduced in this slaughterhouse for men, making the process even faster and more efficient. Everything that was left after these people, piles of food, suitcases, clothes, underwear, generally everything was supposed to be burnt as well. But that was true on paper only. In practice, underwear and clothing, after being disinfected, were sent to Bekleidungskammer, shoes to the tannery, to be put into matching pairs. The suitcases would be brought into the tannery as well, to have them burned, but both from the piles in Birkenau, and while these goods were already on their way to the tannery, the SS men and capos eagerly picked out the valuable items for themselves, saying that Auschwitz had become Canada. That term gained popular acceptance, and since then everything that was left after the people who had been gassed was called Canada. And so you had Canada with food, to which all kinds of delicious tidbits, previous unseen, were flowing into the camp. Figs, dates, lemons, oranges, chocolate, Dutch cheese, butter, sugar, cookies, etc. As a general rule, owning anything from Canada was strictly prohibited, let alone bringing this stuff into the camp. Everyone was forever searched at the gate. Whoever was found to have taken something from Canada was sent to the bunker and usually did not come back at all. But the level of risk of life in Auschwitz was different than the level of risk on Earth. It was constantly so high that risking one's life for whatever trinket that would bring at least some joy did not matter. This new mentality required having some joy, even if the price for that was a huge amount of risk. And so, everyone was constantly trying to get hold of whatever food could be sneaked out from the nearby Canada. Heading back to the camp after a day of labor, we had to get searched at the gate. It was always a chilling experience. There was also a Canada with underwear, clothing, and shoes. Both the capos and the SS men were soon seen in the best kind of underwear, often brought here from the capital of France, silk shirts and pants and exquisite shoes, also soap, luxurious perfume, razor blades, brushes, and cosmetic for women. It is difficult to list in this place everything that a well-situated woman or man would want to take with them. To organize something from Canada became almost a universal drive, and for some of us, the main goal of the day. The SS men would rifle through suitcases and wallets looking for gold, money, and diamonds. Auschwitz soon became a source from which little brooks of diamonds and gold would flow. After some time, you could see the military police setting up roadblocks, searching everyone, stopping military vehicles as well. Neither the SS men nor the capos had as much cunning in searching for confiscated items as did the prisoners, who could find from time to time a diamond hidden in a shoe's heel, in a indentation of a suitcase or a handbag, in toothpaste, a tube of cream, or shoe shine, everywhere where it was least expected. They were only doing it covertly, when the circumstances were favorable, when it was possible to snatch some item left behind by people who had been gassed. Every SS man would try to keep it a secret from the others, but since the camp's commandant himself was visiting Eric Grunke tannery workshop, where a great abundance of assorted valuables was brought in the suitcases by the cartload, watches, perfume, money, etc., they had to connive at their subordinates' misconduct, themselves being afraid of being reported. Part of the prisoners who had access to any sort of Canada quickly attained a privileged status in the camp. They traded in everything, but to think that there was chaos in the camp and that gold brought any respite, that would be wrong. Death, despite having become quite familiar to us, was still regarded as punishment, so all of this trading had to be done in secrecy and undisclosed to anyone from outside. Jasmine was in full bloom and swelled beautifully when a great companion, Senior Lancer 123, Stefan Stempien, was murdered with a shot in the back to his head. I well remember his bravery and cheerful face. Soon after that, one of my dearest colleagues, a courageous officer of the 13th Lancers Regiment, Lieutenant 29, Włodzimierz Makaliński, was killed in the same way. He had passed on to me the location of 2 standards of Lancer regiments, 4th and 13th, which had been hidden in 1939. I sent yet another report to Warsaw by Officer Cadet 112, Stanisław Jaster, who, along with 3 other colleagues, escaped from the camp in spectacular fashion. A long time ago, I saw the movie 10 from Pawiak. I dare say that the escape of 4 prisoners from Auschwitz, disguised as SS officers in the best car in the camp belonging to the camp's commandant, when juxtaposed with what this hell truly was, could surely be material for some great movie. The Hauptwache presented arms. Lagerführer Aumeier, Hans Aumeier, was riding horseback in a hurry from Buna and the evening roll call, when on the road he encountered a car with several officers. He saluted them politely, but was a bit surprised that the driver tried to go across the old, now defunct level crossing. The car turned around quickly and crossed the railway in a different spot. He blamed vodka and the driver's weak head for drink. Their heads were not weak. The escape was a success. The Lagerführer only came back to Auschwitz for the roll call itself, when everyone was already standing in well-adjusted blocks. It was then that all hell broke loose. They told him that 4 prisoners were missing from the roll call, and that, what was worse, they had escaped in the commandant's car. This took place in the building of Blockführerstube, which sent Aumeier into a rage. He was pulling his hair out, yelling that he had bumped into them. Then he threw his cap on the ground and suddenly burst out with laughter. We had no repressions, executions standing to attention at that time, and this is how things were since February 1942. In 1941, football matches were played on Roll Call Square. Now, in 1942, since it was completely filled with buildings, that was not possible anymore. The only sport in which the representatives of the German capos could compete with the Polish prisoners were boxing matches, both in football as well as boxing. Despite severe differences in nutrition and labor, the German capos were always getting beaten by the Poles. Boxing was the only occasion to punch a capo's face, and every Polish prisoner was very eager to do so with the utmost satisfaction, which was always met with a great cheering of the audience. We did have quite a few good boxers. From the work in the organization, I had only known 21, Tadeusz Pietrzykowski closer, who never lost a match and gave many thugs a plumbering. Prisoners who were caught trying to escape were publicly hanged in front of all prisoners. It was also a change for the better. No smashing to death with a rod, no impaling on a stake. After having the prisoner spend some time in the bunker, he would be hanged on wheeled mobile gallows near the kitchen during the evening roll call, with all the other prisoners present in the square. Those hanging the prisoner were to be hanged themselves in the next turn by their successors. This was done to torture them even more. During one such hanging, an order was read out. The camp's commandant made a solemn promise that a prisoner who worked efficiently and behaved well could be even released from the camp. It was therefore ill-advised to undertake unwise escape attempts, as that would lead, as demonstrated at that very moment, to shameful death by hanging. The order did not have much impact on us. Nobody believed the promise of being released. Our eyes had seen far too many murders for their owners to be set free. Besides, an order such as this, read at the moment such as that, could only have resonated with someone with a German mentality. With a whole panoply of humane ways of killing, which were supposed to testify to our executioners' culture, also came the blatant and open transportation of prisoners straight from the infirmary to the gas chambers. When the infirmary accepted more prisoners than it could fit, even with 3 prisoners sharing one bed, and when Claire sated his lust for killing, and yet the hospital was still overcrowded, patients would be taken by car to the gas chambers in Birkenau. Initially, it was done as if with shame, under the cover of darkness in the late evening or early in the morning, so that nobody could see. Then, once the entire camp found out about this tactic with the sick tourists, the shame was gone, and the sick tourists were often transported during the day. It was sometimes done during roll calls, with reinforced guards and rifle barrels looking down at us chillingly from the watchtowers. More than one inmate, on his way to the gas chambers, would call out to his friends, still standing in the square, "See ya, Yashu, take care," waving his cap, bidding them a cheerful farewell. Everyone in the camp was aware of this destination. Why was he so happy then, one would ask. It should be assumed that some had enough of all the terrors they had been through in the camp, so they have thought that nothing worse could possibly await them after death. One day, colleague 41, Stanisław Stawiszyński, approached me and said that among those who had been delivered here from Birkenau to be gunned down was Colonel 62, Jan Karcz, 41 saw him very clearly. The information was confirmed. Colonel 62, a brave officer, had died. I have given these several dozen pages containing description of Auschwitz to some friends of mine. They declared that I have been repeating myself in places. That is possible, partially because of the lack of time to review everything once again, but also because this giant mill processing people into dust, or, if you will, this giant roller crushing transports of people into bloody pulp, resolved constantly and always around the same axis called annihilation. Fragments of individual scenes from the lager, every day anew, over 300 times a year, every day in a slightly different but generally similar way, were showing the same side of the roller, with all its details. If you looked at it for almost 1,000 days, well, if people who live their comfortable lives on Earth make an effort, however small it might be, while reading these pages, they will occupy their minds with one vista of Auschwitz, but from a slightly different angle. Maybe it is for the better that the minds of these people can in some microscopic way unite with our minds, even though our mentalities are as different as 2 is different from 1,000. We were forced to look 1,000 times, and nobody could ever get bored. There was no time for any English spleen, and I want to repeat myself again. It was very difficult to look at these rows of women, exhausted by labor, shuffling in the mud, gray faces, muddy clothes. They walked, holding weaker Musulmaner. There were still some among them whose strong spirit helped support their muscles, and by that able to help others. Some eyes still retained their glow, looking bravely while marching, trying to adjust their rows. I do not know what is more difficult to look at, the exhausted shadows coming back in the evening after each day of labor, or those women who, having an entire day of labor ahead, were venturing out into the fields, still supporting their weaker friends. Unfit for hard labor in the fields, faces and hands were seen. Women from the countryside, used to demanding physical work, were dying here alongside the ladies as well. They were all rushed to work for many kilometers every day under the blazing sun and under torrential rain alike. When the women's feet would sink deep into the mud, the heroes would ride horses right next to them, in the company of dogs, shouting, smoking cigarettes, as cowboys would do with their heads. We had a real Tower of Babel in the camp. Our colleagues spoke various languages, except for the Poles, Germans, Bolsheviks, Czechs, a couple of Belgians, Yugoslavians, Bulgarians, some Frenchmen, Dutchmen, Norwegians, and Greeks as well, were brought into the camp as well. I remember the Frenchmen being given numbers of over 45,000. They died very quickly, like no one else in the camp. They were not fit for work or for friendship, in poor physical shape, stupidly stubborn. The SS men would pick out some of the young Jewish girls brought into the camp in transports and already awaiting their baths in the gas chambers, saving them from death. Being attracted by the naked body's beauty, they would pick several girls a day, the more curvaceous ones. If the girl was still able to save herself after a few days, paying for her right to live with her beauty or some kind of clever stratagem, she could be put in the camp's office, the infirmary, or the commandant's office. There were not many job openings, though, and a lot of pretty faces. In a similar manner, the SS men also pulled out some of the young Jews standing in line to the gas chambers. These Jews were normally registered and put in our blocks in various commandos. This was, again, a way of handling the rest of the world's Jews. I have already mentioned that for some time the Jews were being assigned to various indoor jobs. They would write letters to their families saying that they were being treated well, but the frequency of their letters was equal to ours, that is, twice a month, on Sundays. Now, from time to time, the SS men would visit the blocks where the Jews were living, usually on working days. We were still writing our letters on Sundays. Coming in the evening, SS men gathered all the Jews living in the block and instructed them to sit at the table. They were giving them standardized letter templates, ordering them to write to their families, cousins, or, should a Jew have none, even a friend or acquaintance. They patiently waited until everyone was done. After that, they collected the letters to have them sent to various European countries. If a Jew happened to write that he was not doing so great, then, well, so everyone would write that they were doing great. Once they completed their objective of writing a satisfying amount of reassuring letters to Jews in other countries, our Jews would become redundant and useless, so they were quickly disposed of by being moved to Birkenau, the most exhausting kinds of labor, or even directly to the SK. In the SK, as always, people were being finished off. There was a Jew there, commonly known as Dusiciel, the Strangler, identity unknown. His duty was to kill a varying number of Jews a day, ranging from a few to several, depended on the general population of the SK on any given day. Jews designed for death that day had to face the grim fate of being killed by their co-religionist, a muscular Jew, the Strangler. Every half an hour or so, more or less frequently, depending on how long the line was, the Strangler would order his chosen victim to lie down on the ground, face up. Should someone resist, the Strangler would lie him down. He would position the pole of a shovel at the victim's throat, and then jump onto it, pressing the entire mass of his body on pole of a shovel width. The pole should suffocate the victim's throat. The Strangler would then swing from one side of the pole to the other, while the Jew under the shovel gruntled, kicked, only to die in the end. Sometimes the Strangler would tell his victim that there was nothing to fear, for death comes quickly enough. In the SK, the Strangler and the Jews sent to him to be killed were treated as an autonomous death sub-commando. The proper part of the SK, where the Poles made up the majority of the personnel, lived, worked, and died separately, accepting in other ways the same death. In the summer, rather unexpectedly, many inmates were moved to the SK. This was the political department's directive as a result of their inquiry of the cases from the earth, that those cases had been proved. As for my colleagues and members of the organization in the camp, Platoon Leader Officer Cadet 26, Stanisław Maringa, Lieutenant 27, Jerzy Poraziński, Captain 124, Father Tadeusz Chrościcki, and 125, Son Tadeusz Lucjan Chrościcki, were moved to the SK in Rajsko. After some time I received a note, which was sent rather carelessly, although fortunately it was not intercepted, from Lieutenant 27, Jerzy Poraziński, which read, "I would like to inform you that we are bound to become nothing but puffs of the smoke soon enough, so we'll try our luck tomorrow during work. Our chances are slim. Bid farewell to my family, should you live and find yourself back on Earth one day, and tell them that, if I am dead by then, I died fighting." The following day, before nightfall, I received news. Upon hearing the sound signaling the end of the workday in Rajsko-Birkenau, all the prisoners from the SK started running, trying to escape. Perhaps the escape was poorly prepared, or perhaps someone had betrayed them, since everyone had to be informed ahead of time, or maybe the conditions were too difficult. Whatever the reason, the SS men killed all the prisoners, about 70 of them. The German capos had been of great assistance in catching and killing the prisoners. Apparently, they had spared some of them. It was said that several of them successfully escaped. Some of the prisoners apparently made it across the Vistula. The incoming news was self-contradictory, though. 3 years later, however, I found out from Romek G, identity unknown, that 125, Tadeusz Lucjan Chrościcki, the son of one of my colleagues in Warsaw, who was in the fleeing group that had somehow escaped death. We knew that just as once on our blocks inmates were suffered on lice, in separate blocks from us in females' camp, there was a plague of fleas. What was the source of this differentiation, with different types of insects having penchants for different genders, we did not understand at the time. It was not until later when it turned out that some of the commandos from the female camp were working in buildings which had fleas, and they brought these fleas into the blocks. The fleas, having found themselves in excellent conditions, soon took control of their blocks, having driven the then incubant white tenants away. Soon the women had been moved from our main camp to Birkenau, where they were dying in horrible conditions in wooden blocks. There was a lack of water on blocks and the toilets as well. Some of them had to sleep on the bare ground, for wooden blocks had no floors. They were knee-deep in mud, as there was no drainage nor paving. In the morning, hundreds of them remained in the square, not having enough strength to work. Gloomy, indifferent sufferers, no longer really resembling women. Soon they came to know the camp authorities' mercy by being sent to the gas chambers by the hundred. Over 2,000 of these beings, who used to be women once, were gassed on that occasion. The women had left behind them an enormous legion of fleas in the now derelict blocks. The carpenters, who had to go there and fix some damaged windows or doors before male commandos could be accommodated in these blocks again, were talking about their truly grisly work in the kingdom of the swarming brunettes. They were eager to jump at intruders, biting the flesh in great masses. There was no protection against them. Gathering up trousers at one's ankles or sleeves at one's wrists was no use. The carpenters just took their clothes off and put them in some safe place, and protected their naked bodies by waving their hands constantly, like an animal being put out to pasture in the field. The fleas were jumping all over the floor, and when you looked at them against the sun, you had the impression of seeing a great number of fountains. At the time, our camp had already had lavatories and nice bathrooms in the blocks. Sewage systems were installed everywhere. Motor pumps had been installed in the basements of 3 blocks, providing water to the entire camp. Many prisoners lost their lives to have all these facilities constructed. Zugangs coming into the camp were now being put in a situation very different from the one that we once had encountered, without the option to wash ourselves or have a quiet moment in the lavatory. Now there was a warden here, and many people envied him this position. He just sat in the lavatory, eating his soup. He was always given additional rations, and even though the place was not exactly suitable for eating, he was not bothered at all. Consuming his soup in peace, he would shout at the prisoners, using the beautiful lavatory, urging them to hurry. The women moved from the acceptable conditions, such as those in our blocks in 1942, straight into these primitive conditions of Rajsko, felt the difference profoundly. The women were moved, but the high fence, which was once built in spring to separate the prisons of different genders, had remained until the entire camp was deloused. The fleas, however, managed to overcome the obstacle. Not all of them, but some. The more enterprising ones managed to get over the fence somehow and launch an assault on our camp, finding plenty of food there. In the meantime, in the spoon-carving workshop, the situation was such that Many thousands of spoons had been produced up to that point, and one could reasonably suspect that our commando was to be disbanded soon. Thanks to the influence of my friends, 111, identity unknown, 19, Tadeusz Słowiaczek, and 52, Tadeusz Myszkowski, a place was prepared for me in the carpentry workshop among the carpenters who once had been chosen by Konrad Lang. For the time being, I was working with Master Carpenter 111, identity unknown, in one workshop, but when 111 and 127, identity unknown, caught typhoid, I was the only one left in the workshop. I had to pretend to be an able carpenter responsible for their workshop. The capo was new. Having taken his position as the person responsible for the carpenters in the tannery after the death from typhoid of the madman Hulajnoga scooter, identity unknown, my position was difficult. I was given designs for ordered pieces of furniture which I had to make them myself from wood. I had only been working alone for 12 days, but I must confess it was extremely nerve-wracking. I was no professional, and I did not want to get into the capo's bad books. Anyway, I was making a wardrobe, and even though when it came to finishing it, I had the help of 92, Wacław Weszke, an excellent master craftsman, still, for these 12 long days, I managed to pretend to be a master carpenter in front of the capricious but foolish capo. I was no novice to carpentry, after all. Guile had to make up for my lack in advanced skills, but the arrival of 92 Wacław Weszke into my workshop, which he had chosen on purpose, was greeted by me with genuine happiness. Since then I had more time to set up the network here and make plans for the organization's next moves, meeting my colleagues in the tannery shop or under the pretense of having to choose the correct resource from the shed where the planks were stored, conferring with 50, Jan Milczarek, and 106, identity unknown, on the tall pile of new straw mattresses. Through the gaps in the roof, we could see the movement of Eric Grunke, or the commandant, as if from an excellent vantage point. Typhoid was still bothering us greatly, and the SS men's barracks had been deloused. In our part of the camp, every block had sick people. In our room, number 7, block 25, every day someone new went to the infirmary, having caught typhoid. We already had half as many beds as we needed. Officer Cadet 94, identity unknown, was the first one from our group to catch the disease, followed by Corporal 91, Stanisław Polkowski, then 71, Jan Mosdorf, then 73, Piotr Kownacki, 95, identity unknown, 111, identity unknown, who shared a bed with me, 93, identity unknown, then almost everyone else. It is difficult to remember the order in which people went to the hospital. Not many of them returned. Instead, they were heaped onto the wagon loads of the corpses heading for the crematorium. Every day, one could see several families' faces among the corpses of prisoners being cast onto the wagons like wooden logs. I was somehow resistant the disease at the time. Dr. 2, Władysław Dering, showed up and offered to give me an anti-typhoid shot. He got the vaccine secretly from outside the camp. I had to think what to do, because had I been already bitten by the typhoid blonde? I presumed so, as I had been sleeping with 111, identity unknown, who was already sick, and it usually took over a dozen days for the first symptoms, the fever, to manifest themselves. Taking the vaccine could mean death. As I suspected, I was not infected. I decided in favor of taking the shot. Out of our team, standing at the front of the block at the roll calls, out of 30 lads, only 7 remained, maybe 8. The rest died of typhoid. From our colleagues, the following passed away. The brave Vernichora, 50, Jan Mielcarek, and also 53, Józef Hramiec, 54, Stefan Gaik, 58, Andrzej Marduła, 71, Jan Mostorf, 73, Piotr Kownacki, 91, Stanisław Polkowski, 94, identity unknown, 126, Tadeusz Czechowski, and my late, lamed friend, 30, Eugeniusz Trebling. How can I say about one person, that is my late lamented colleague, if I grieved over all of them? I went to great lengths to try to save Captain 30, Eugeniusz Trebling. He was always cheerful, supporting others with his humor and his bowl of extra food. Many people had been surviving by his side. Just before he contracted typhoid, his blood got infected, but Dr. 2, Władysław Dering, performed surgery on Captain 30's hand, removing the threat. A week later, however, Captain 30 caught typhoid. Having gone to Block 28, he spent several days there, asking colleagues as a good host to eat all the treats that he was given from Canada. He would say in a loud voice, "God has given it. Good people have brought it, so eat it." He had a high fever and yet kept talking with humor, saying that he had to live, that he was going to leave Auschwitz, even if he had to carry his own head under his arm, and that since he had already been through the horror of Hamburg, he was going to see his Yasha no matter what. He kept talking like this. In the end, he got meningitis. They moved him to Block 20. He was given medical punctures. He was well cared for, but to no avail. He left Auschwitz in the form of smoke coming out of the chimney. I have a instruction, Isjago, from him. If anyone understands it, please contact me. We had our losses. Summer of 1942, true, there were new incoming recruits as well. Several new colleagues joined our organization, even though some of them had been in the camp for a long time at this point. 128, 129, Leon Kukiełka, 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, 135, 136, 137, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143, 144. All identity unknown. I had been working for a couple of weeks in the block, not going to the carpentry workshop at all, reaping the benefits of Blockman 80s, Alfred Włodarczyk's friendly attitude towards me. He had rescued me in difficult moments several times before already. He gave me some artistic work to do in the block, explaining that the authorities that he needed proper inscriptions on the covers of the block's books. I was painting typical camp scenes, giving out extra soup to the entitled ones, evening feet inspection combined with beating on the stool. From pieces of colored paper, I managed to make some kind of paper mosaic. The result was quite nice. Even when Palicz came to the block a month later, when I was no longer there, he instructed all the other pictures to be destroyed, shattering the glass and breaking the frames, but he requested my mosaic to be given to him. A new round of the lousing at the camp had started. One day, somewhere between the 20th and 25th of August, 1942, just like every day at the time, I did not go to work and stayed in the camp, painting in the block. Suddenly I spotted several trucks with SS troops of considerable strength approaching the typhoid block, Block 20, according to new numbering. The SS men quickly surrounded the block. I must confess that observing this scene made my heart first turn into ice cold, then burning hot. I thought that the reason for this invasion was different, but what I actually witnessed a minute later was equally dreadful. The patients were dragged out and quickly loaded into cars. It did not matter whether they were sick and unconscious or sick a month ago, but now almost healthy, convalescent in quarantine. All of them were packed into the trucks and were taken in several rounds into the gas chambers. Then everyone from Block 20 was taken away, even those who were healthy and only prolonged their stay here to have some more rest. Apart from the flaggers who were recognized by their uniforms, as from many months, infirmary staff were wearing uniforms quite different from ours. These uniforms were made out of white canvas with a vertical red stripe painted on the back, and the same ones painted on their trousers. Then, Dr. II, Władysław Dering, saved many Poles, then by ordering them to change, few at the time, into the white uniforms of the flaggers, introducing them to the commission of SS doctors as flaggers working with patients. Finally, it was pointed out to him that there were slightly too many of these alleged nurses. But then, since the real orderliness, whom the SS men already knew, were at the end of the group, somehow they got away with it. I saw a scene when an SS man threw two little prisoners into the truck. One 8-year-old boy kneeled before him on the ground and begged to be left alone. The SS man kicked him in the stomach and threw him into the truck like a puppy. They were all finished off that day in the gas chambers at Rajsko. After that, they have been burning for 2 days in crematorium, and more bodies of the prisoners have been added continuously. For Block 20 was by no means the last one. After Block 20, Block 28 had to give up its prisoners. Then the wooden barrack, which had been built between Blocks 27 and 28 for the time of the typhoid epidemic. And then they set about choosing from the commandos. The SS commission was walking from block to block where 2 commandos lived, taking to the chambers everyone who had swollen legs and bodily injuries or seemed like a poor worker. Then they dealt on the Schonungsblock with all the Muselmänner, whose number was not as great as the time because of the supplies from Canada. Those, however, who were Muselmänner at the time were swiftly taken to the gas chamber to be deloused. From the gas chamber to the crematorium, from the crematorium they were leaving via the chimney. This new expression, delousing of life, had gained popularity in the camp as well. The piles of clothing and underwear that have been left by those who were brought to the camp from the free world only to lose their lives in gas chambers were also packed and hung in separate gas chambers to be disinfected for real delousing. Because of that, the term delousing took the meaning of exposing an item to the effect of gas, even if the said item was a human being. A couple of days later, on August 30th, I fell sick with fever and joint pain. My calves also hurt upon being pressed. These were almost all symptoms of typhoid. The only thing missing was the headache. But I never had a headache in my entire life, so I did not know this feeling at all. I assume I took it from my father, who used to say many a time with genuine surprise, "It must be a stupid head indeed to hurt." But because both the physicians and my colleagues insisted that a headache is a must with typhoid, I waited a couple of days. Fortunately enough, thanks to the Blockman 80, Alfred Wodarczyk's, and permission to stay at the block, I did not go to work. But my fever shot up to over 39 degrees Celsius at this point, and it was pretty difficult for me to stand straight at the roll calls. I did not want to go to the infirmary because there was no certainty that the trucks would not come again to take everyone to the gas chambers. The sickness in the best case scenario, with quarantine included, would take no less than 2 months. That was my second severe sickness in Auschwitz. Apart from that, I had a slightly raised temperature a couple of times due to a cold. Had I been free, I would perhaps have evolved into a flu or something like that. Here, I was fighting off the sickness with my willpower, or perhaps nervous tension while at work. Now, however, I knew that day by day, especially in the evening, I could not get over the sickness, for I had barely any strength left to walk. I do not know what would happen if it was not for the delousing of the camp, just like the first time, but in a different manner. I was already exhausted with the fever, which had lasted for days. All the other blocks had been deloused already, and it was our block's turn now. Even though my fever had almost reached 40 degrees Celsius in the evening, I prepared myself for the delousing, helping the room foreman, my colleague 111, identity unknown, who had fortunately recovered from typhoid and returned. When the whole block went to be deloused, the people who were left in the building were only those responsible for moving the block's inventory. In half an hour, everyone had to leave, to be deloused anyway. Then, because of my great enfeeblement, I did not feel like doing that. Remembering how difficult it was for me to survive the delousing when I had fever that other time, there was one way to avoid that. I had to go to the infirmary, but then again, they could snatch me and send into the gas chambers from there. I hesitated, but Dr. 2, Władysław Dering, arrived, and seeing that my temperature was high, he had all the paperwork filled out for me outside official hours, and put me in block 28 in the infirmary, pulling me out of block 25 just at the very last minute before the roll call. My fever had reached 41 degrees Celsius at this point, and I was incredibly weak. That was indeed typhoid. The lack of headache had the advantage of allowing me to stay conscious and alert all the time. Perhaps the course of my illness was less severe due to having been vaccinated. During my first night in Block 28, the first air raid took place. Several airplanes cast light onto the camp and dropped 2 bombs onto Rajsko. It was possible that they were trying to hit the crematorium, but the raid was not really serious. It had wonderful effect on us. We saw the chaos among the SS men. 2 guards perched on the nearest watchtowers abandoned their posts. They were running along the wires like they lost their heads. The SS men from the barracks ran to our camp in a chaotic horde, looking for another. Unfortunately, it was a very weak raid, and the only one that aimed at Auschwitz, at least during my time there. My stay at Block 28 lasted 2 days and was called observation time. My dear colleague 100, identity unknown, cared for me with a lot of kindness, always staying at my side, eager to bring me lemon or sugar. Thanks to him, I still had contact with my colleagues and could influence the progress of our work. My rash must have been visible, though, because they had to move me to Block 20, where grim events had taken place weeks earlier. While I was still in Block 28, Dr. 2, Władysław Dering, gave me an injection of some kind, which lowered my fever from 40 degrees Celsius to just a tiny bit over 37. When he appeared the next day, I jokingly said that if this injection was going to bring my temperature down from 37 to 34, I would surely die, so I cannot agree to take it. My body was always very responsible to all treatments and medicines. Block 20, after the recent removal and gassing of all its inhabitants, was already full again. Every day, the dead bodies of those who had died of typhoid were thrown onto the tracks like logs and taken away. I do not know if I have mentioned that already, but all the bodies that were taken to the crematorium were naked, regardless how they died. Be it typhoid, some other disease, Claire's needle, or Paluch's gunshot. Here, in the typhoid block, corpses were removed in the morning, but just before noon, and especially in the evening, new dead bodies were piling up in the hallways, blue-hued, naked, lying on top of each other, resembling meat stalls on the market. Here, in typhoid block, corpses were removed in the morning, but just before noon, and especially in the evening, new dead bodies were piling up in the hallways, blue-hued, naked, lying on top of each other, resembling meat stalls at the market. My first encounter with a quite quarrelsome colleague, the local physician, was not exactly cordial, but just a few hours later I felt a surge of friendliness towards him. He was selfless and cared only about his patients, looking after everyone, running around, washing them, feeding them, giving them the necessary shots of medicine. To me, he was Dr. 145, identity unknown. The second courageous doctor here was Captain Dr. 146, Henryk Suchnicki, a kind man, full of energy. Next to that, I was still under 100's care through his colleague 101, Witold Kosztowny, who had access to this place as an orderly with a syringe of taking blood samples for analysis. My young colleague Edek, 57, Edward Ciesielski, was the warehouse man in the administration of this block. Thanks to him, once I felt better, I had access to additional rations of food, lard, and sugar. A pillow and a blanket from Canada were sent to me by Kazio, 39, Kazimierz Radwański, with the consent of 76, Bernard Świerczyna. Before the crisis passed, I was lying in the great semi-mortuary, pondering the fact of still having the fortitude to understand it at all and take it without going insane. Next to me, people were constantly grunting and groaning in agony, were dying, getting out of bed, throwing blankets. Someone was talking to his dearest mother in his fevered delusions. Someone was screaming at somebody. Another refused to eat or requested water. Having high fever was one trying to jump out of the window. One was arguing with the doctor or was asking him for something. I was lying, thinking that from all those experiences one could lose his mind. Just witnessing these sensations, one could develop a distaste for the journey of a human being and, in a way, pity the imperfection of the human body, detest the very condition of being ill. Because of all that, an immense desire to leave this place and regain my strength started to grow in me. Once the crisis has ended, and I had the impression of being strong enough to go down the stairs to the lavatory. Before that, one had to use a rather primitive one for the patients in the room. It turned out that I was still so weak that I had to cling to the wall. It seemed weird that I lacked enough strength not only to ascend, but also to descend the stairs. My vitality was coming back to me, seemingly very slowly. During my time of weakness, in case of plans taking people to gas chambers, my colleagues were ready to carry and hide me somewhere in the attic. A couple of times, Claire, with the gaze of a basilisk, had traversed the halls, picking the candidates for the needle. Here, I met the recruit to our work, 118, identity unknown, 146, Henryk Suchnicki, 147, 148, 149, all identity unknowns. Dr. 145 was doing his best. The position was perfect for him. There was absolutely no need to set up or change anything here. I knew he was worthy of my trust. Dr. 2, Władysław Derling, would come here from time to time, bringing me lemons and tomatoes, always procured in some illegal manner. My recovery was actually relatively quick. During my quarantine, I spent time in the courtyard, talking to my colleague through the bars which separated the pestilent block. My colleague, 76, Bernard Świerczyna, would bring me news about the new branch of organization which he had just created. 61, Konstanty Piekarski, about the project of fleeing the camp through the tunnel under the block 28, which 4, Alfred Stossel, had initiated and started with the help of 129, Leon Kukiełka, and 130, identity unknown. Colleague 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, came to me with a proposition to merge and divide anew all of our forces, and also to appoint a permanent commander for each individual group, which was also Colonel 121st Juliusz Gilewicz's wish. As there had been some changes after the last delousing, I devised a plan of merging and dividing the organization in the following way. As the base of the plan, I chose the blocks, because after the general delousing the camp, authorities sorted the inmates in the blocks by commandos. There was no longer any need to duplicate the work by preparing separate plans of seizing control of the camp for two situations, doing work and while staying at the blocks. Each block was a platoon. It meant the members of the organization living in a building, regardless of the original structure, formed the skeleton of the block's platoon. Each platoon could potentially greatly increase in size, depending on how many other inmates the colleagues would be able to inspire at the moment in the explosion, while at the same time neutralizing the pro-German faction. Block X, the inmates from the lower floor, and Block XA, the inmates from the upper floor, put together would form a two-platoon company housed in one building, with the company's commander on the spot. Several blocks, buildings, would form a battalion. I divided the whole into 4 battalions and proposed to make Major 85, Zygmunt Bogdanowski Bończa, as it was, till that point anyway, the commander of the entire military action. To command the 1st Battalion, Major 150, Blocks 15, 17, 18, Edward Karol Getyński. To command the 2nd Battalion, Captain 60, Stanisław Kazuba, Blocks 16, 22, 23, 24. To command the 3rd Battalion, Captain 114, Tadeusz Paolone Lisowski, Blocks 19, 25, the kitchen, and the infirmary personnel from Blocks 20, 21, and 28. To command the 4th Battalion, Captain 116, Zygmunt Pawłowicz, Trzęsimiech, Blocks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I refrained from organizing the rest of the blocks due to technical reasons, as the remaining blocks were only being fleshly put to use, like 1 or 2, or used as warehouses like 3, 26, and 27, or undergoing the final phases of a construction like 12, 13, 14, or the special block, 11. Colonel 121, Juliusz Gilewicz, had no objections to this plan and approved it in this shape. A couple of days later, I left the infirmary and returned to the camp. My quarantine was shortened thanks to friendly physicians who forged the paperwork by stating an earlier date of my admittance than in reality. It was the beginning of October 1942. I went to work in 500s, as always, to the tannery, but this time I did not join the commando of carpenters as I used to before my illness, but the commando of tanners, the proper tannery, thanks to my colleague 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, who introduced me to the new capo of the tannery, Mateczka, Mommy, as a tanner who had been sick but who now returned. During the first period of my stay in the tannery, I worked with Colonel 121, Juliusz Gilewicz, taking care of wet white tanning. Then, thanks to the friendly attitude of 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, and 61, Konstanty Piekarski, I was moved to the drying chamber, which was warm, thanks to a giant iron furnace, and stayed there for 4 months, pretending to be a tanner, learning the tricks of this new trade. The appearance of the giant courtyard of the tannery did not change too much. Every day, several trucks would bring items left behind by the people who had been gassed, in order to have them burned in the tannery's great hearth. Shoes were not burned. A huge number of shoes of all kinds, tan and black, for men and women, for children, and various sizes, were dumped from trucks every day, forming great pyramids. A separate commando was formed, tasked with pairing these shoes. Someone else was responsible for burning suitcases, wallets, women's handbags, prams, and various toys. Woolen yarn in all colors that many women brought with them was not burned, but tucked away. It was used for knitting sweaters. The tannery's giant furnace, equipped with an industrial chimney, absorbed it all. The fuel was for free, always being brought almost to the very fireplace itself. Those who were doing the burning had a chance to rummage the suitcases. From time to time, someone from the tannery could get to the pile of suitcases before they delivered the furnace. Snatching anything from the courtyard was difficult. It was easy to get spotted by Eric Grunke or Walter, identity unknown. Again, I saw, pushed by the urge of owning gold or precious stones, suitcases, handbags, and briefcases that were ripped apart, and shoes, cream, and soap that were checked. Dollars were the only paper money which were taken. The whole courtyard was full of banknotes, whirling in the wind like fallen autumn leaves, usually French francs. Nobody wanted to hold on to them, especially bearing in mind the prospect of being searched at the gate. We thought them to be completely useless. They were only good to be used in laboratory. The tanners, fellow inmates, the camp aristocracy, out of all the commandos for some time, used to take 50,000 francs whenever one wanted to go to the laboratory. It was a running joke at the time, saying that if one were to take less, others would think him to be a misser.